Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to our 5 o'clock special meeting, July 20th. We were clapping because corporate communications has presented a new video. Wonderful job there, Mr. Ryder, you and your team. So, thank you. All right, Council. Never can have too much prayer. I know we prayed to begin the last meeting. We have invocation on this. So as we call the meeting to order, I go to item 2.0, invocation. Any volunteers to pray? Hands? Okay. Councilmember Waddell.
Father God, we thank you for this opportunity to do business on behalf of this city, oh God. Father, first of all, we commit this council and this city into your hands. We ask that you would speak clearly to us, that we would be able to move, that you would be heard through us. And Father, we give you glory and honor for the work that you allow us to do. And God, we ask that all things that we do be done in decency and in order. In your Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Ma'am. All right. Item 3.0 is approval of the agenda. Council, I look to you for a motion to approve.
Motion approved.
The motion by Councilmember Wright to approve. This second by Councilmember Hare. Any discussion on the motion? All right, Council, I look to you for your.
I had a question. Are we going to move some stuff around, or are we going to?
Well, we'll keep it as is. I think we were zipping right through it. So we're about an hour behind. So all of our guests have been impacted. So, all right. So as Council, as a motion and properly second, and those in favor of the agenda approval, please vote at this time. Councilmember Banks McLaughlin, are you on Zoom?
Yes, green.
Green. All right. Madam Clerk, that is unanimous. Motion carries. All right, item 4.1, I have a presentation by Fayetteville Police Accountability Community Task Force, or PACT. They are presenting via Zoom to us. The packets, some of the presentation was emailed to us earlier, so if you would like to pull that up and reference that. And sir, so as we talked about in our 4 o'clock special meeting, as items that were listed by the Ville's Voice, the same holds true for PACT. Any of the items that are important as a part of the community discussion that will occur, the council was certainly open to taking those items into consideration. The council as a body will make the final decision as to what these items look like and the type of legislation that comes out of it, but we certainly welcome PACT and other organizations to give us your input and Ville's Voice, and to give us your input in this very important discussion about community and police reform and equality throughout our city. So at this time, item 4.1 is PACT. We'll turn it over to you.
All right, good afternoon, Council. I'm Sean McMillan from Fayetteville Police Accountability Community Task Force. I'm joined here today in the room.
Jennifer, can we turn his volume up?
Founder and president, as well as our treasurer, Ms. Opara Fenderson. There's only 2 of us in the room, but we especially like to thank the rest of our executive board and PACT. Can't be with us here today physically, but definitely put a lot of work into this presentation and this campaign. That's our Vice President, Dr. Tina Barr, as well as our Secretary, Ms. Carla Ikaza Austin, and another member at large, Mr. Chaliko Hurst. We'd also like to thank the council for giving us this space and time to address you. We come today with information regarding implementation of independent oversight for Fayetteville. Most of us have heard the term.
Mr. McMillan, if you could give us a moment, we're trying to get your volume up. It's a little difficult for the council to hear, so give us 1 second. Okay, Mr. McMillan, can you speak into the mic so we can hear you?
Yes, can you hear me?
A lot better, yes, sir.
All right, good. So I'm gonna start over. I appreciate y'all's time. I'm Mr. Sean McMillan from Fayetteville Police Accountability Community Task Force. I'm joined today by Ms. Kathy Griggs, our president and co-founder. Also, our treasurer is here, Mr. Opara Fenderson. There's only 2 of us here today in the room, but there's a lot of other people, members of Fayetteville PACT, that put work into this. We'd like to thank our vice president, Dr. Tina Barr. our secretary, Ms. Carla Ikaza Austin, and our member at large, Mr. Chaliko Hurst. I'd like to start off with a quote, and y'all have heard this, I think, from me before: power concedes nothing without a demand. The first part of that quote is often left out, but it's probably even more important. This is a quote from Frederick Douglass. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are people who want crops without plowing the ground. They want the ocean without the roar of its many waters. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or maybe both, but it must be a struggle. To the members of the council and to the mayor, we thank you for this time and space to present information on implementation of an oversight authority for the Fayetteville Police Department. We also like to acknowledge up front that we would not be here if it weren't for a clear demand signal from the citizens of Fayetteville. You've seen dozens of protests, prayer meetings, forums. You've even seen an occupation of the market house. And you should take that as a clear understanding that there is a demand signal for change, substantive change. And the things that we present to you today are going to be a step in the right direction as far as presenting and holding substantive change for our people. Next slide, please. So have you ever been in your car? It's the next slide. Have you ever been in your car and not been able to leave because you're so captivated by a certain song or a certain radio interview? This happened to me back in June, in the early days of the uprising. I was listening to an interview on NPR, and it was a young man that was speaking about this moment and what it meant. He was going back and looking at history, referencing the struggle for African Americans, especially up to now, and why people were so impassioned about having change in this moment. So going back years, I was very familiar with the term mass incarceration. In about 2015 or 16, I read a book called The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And in it, she really does a great job of explaining how our criminal justice system disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities, destroys the very foundation of some neighborhoods and families, and how we do little at the municipal level, at the state level, and at the national level to address mass incarceration and its impacts. Since 2016, PACT has been working to attrit the impacts of mass incarceration here in our community in Fayetteville. We've done so pointedly by targeting police accountability and trying to provide a greater degree of transparency, a greater degree of accountability for our police department here in Fayetteville. What this interview did was it showed me that we're in a moment that's a little different than any that we've ever been in our lifetime. The interviewee talked about how youth across the United States were rising up and saying the exact same thing that we've been saying in Fayetteville all over the country. The ways that they were expressing this looked to a lot of people like civil unrest, but the message behind all of it was that there needed to be change, it needed to be immediate, and we needed our local elected officials to act on those calls for change, those demands for change. So what we've done since the uprising started, we've listened to our community. And what we've seen is there's still a desire for us as a community to do more in terms of actual reform, more in terms of us changing laws, changing policies in order to create and effectuate substantive change. So the manifestation of what that young man talked about looks something like bold new agendas, bold new action, bold new policies that change the way we think about public policy. That young man on the interview dared everybody to dream. He said, make your elected officials uncomfortable. Make sure that they know that we need change and we need it now. And it's very easy to talk about big picture about change. The harder work, as you all know, is coming together, rolling our sleeves up, and figuring out what good policy looks like, looking at what reform looks like to us and what's best for our community. Next slide, please. So as we waited, this is what we saw. We saw that the sentiment was there from our leaders. We saw a lot of energy be put into things like the Yellow Movement, which was a movement here in town to paint the street. We understand as an organization that there has to be a space for love, there has to be a space for healing, and there has to be a space for coming together to express yourself in an artful way. But we knew as an organization that the Yellow Movement alone could not do it. We've expressed to ourselves, and we've talked to other members of the community who say this is a good start. This is a sentiment that says unequivocally that justice matters to us, that Black lives matter. However, without real substantive change, this is performative at best. This is a show. If you're thinking about this in terms of a car, we're addressing what the paint job looks like on the car, but not really actually looking at what's under the hood. And our community is really asking us to look at what's under the hood and create change that is substantive. They're asking us to fix this car so it's a vehicle we can all move in. So our challenge today is to put our strength and power and commitment into working towards systemic change. It might lead to some messy and uncomfortable conversations amongst the council. It might cause some hurt feelings, but it is what this moment calls us to do. Next slide, please. In this brief, you're going to see us go from macro, big picture, providing historical context and definitions of what oversight is, to getting down to the nuts and bolts of what our proposal for oversight will be for the city. So I'll be followed by Ms. Kathy Griggs, and she's going to give you a few details from a draft ordinance that we spent a lot of time working on, and that spells out the particulars of the detail. So hang with us on the big picture stuff that I know a lot of you are familiar with. We're going to get to the minutia and some of the details on what the ordinance looks like. So going from macro to micro, we have to start out first with the macro and what we determined our demands to be here at Fayetteville PACT up front. And we did this within the first week of the uprising, so early June. Next slide, please. So you all know that Fayetteville PACT has been asking for CRB, for a Citizen Review Board, for a long time. We were here multiple times last year. And we've also been in your council or on Zoom even as recently as a couple of months ago asking for the same. We also want you to know that tonight we're coming to you with the message that we needed to be permanent and we needed to be lasting. And we're going to give you a plan of how to do that. We're going to present the details of something called a Civilian Police Oversight Authority, a CPOA, if you want to put it in an acronym form. And that is a permanent oversight body to be established here at the municipal level. Our demand number 2 is doing the same thing at the county level for the sheriff's office. So CPOAs at the Fayetteville Police Department level and also at the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, our top 2 demands. Our third demand has to do with the COVID-19 crisis down in the detention center. We know that there have been 33 cases of COVID in the detention center. We understand that that is not directly in your purview to affect. However, all of us should recognize that there was a human rights issue or human rights violations and not providing that population with masks for months, with never releasing a public policy regarding COVID-19 and the detention center, and also with not aggressively testing. We asked the council to reconsider providing a non-binding resolution in support of masks and testing in the detention center to address COVID-19 outbreak. Our fourth demand goes along with number 1 for this council. We expect the CPOA to be established first and then to be followed subsequently by establishment of a Citizen Review Board, a CRB. And I'll talk more about that later. And then our last demand, also not something directly in your purview, but something you can affect with the power that you have as elected officials. It is to weigh in on ending cash bail here with the non-binding resolution. Next slide, please. A couple of acronyms that you can hear over and over again throughout this brief. One is a CRB. I know you're familiar with it. For the people at home that are monitoring this is an old issue here in Fayetteville. 2012, there was a study done based on statistics that noted that Black and brown drivers were being targeted while driving by police here in Fayetteville. That study caused a lot of movement at City Hall and in the police department. We had multiple assets come nationally to take a look at practices in our police department. We also had a recommendation at the time by NOBLE, the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement Executives. And that recommendation was to establish a CRB, or an oversight body here in Fayetteville. So mind you, this is back in 2012, 2013 when this happened. 8 years later, we're still asking for a CRB, a citizen review board. And that fell apart in 2014. And I'll talk a little bit later about why it fell apart and some of the pitfalls to avoid this time around. But know that a CRB is something that us as Fayetteville PACT and multiple organizations in Fayetteville have asked for and demand at this point. And then the other term that you may not be as familiar with is a Civilian Police Oversight Authority, a CPOA. And that oversight authority would be a permanent body that would be established that would really be able to steward and guide the CRB. And I'll talk about what the structure looks like, but know that that CPOA is civilians that are permanently hired that sit independently of the police department and actually independently of the city hall, and are able to advocate on behalf of citizens as oversight practitioners. A good way to think about this, especially for our veterans that are watching this. In the Army, we have a secretary of the Army who is a civilian. He wears a suit and tie to work. He doesn't wear a uniform. And that civilian is trusted just as much as uniformed members to work on behalf of the United States and the people of the United States. That type of separation from the actual apparatus of the police department and that type of independence is what we need. We need a civilian that's not sworn to protect the thin blue line, that will advocate for the people of Fayetteville. And that is embodied in a Civilian Police Oversight Authority, a CPOA. So we want to drill into what oversight means and what it could be for our community. We'll do so in the next slide. You all have probably seen, if you looked at the materials that we provided to you, some documents from NACOL. NACOL is the National Association for Civilian Oversight in Law Enforcement. Kathy and I are NACOL trained. We consider ourselves part of the family. We started noticing last year that there were tons of different models of oversight, and we really need to try to find something that we could recommend to you as a body that fit Fayetteville and also was forward-leaning enough to have some permanence and not get caught up in a lot of the pitfalls of other CRBs in North Carolina. So some of the ways that an oversight authority can help you really is building a bridge between our city government and the community that we're supposed to take care of, the community that we're supposed to serve and protect. It does this by having people independent of the police department who advocate for civilians and who can build a bridge between our city government and the populace. It also manages risk in a certain way. By looking upstream and establishing systems upstream, you can avoid some of the pitfalls that come through negative interaction, especially the fallout from police misconduct. One of the manifestations of fallout is lawsuits. Our city now has a couple of pending lawsuits from citizens that say we weren't given a proper ear from anybody in City Hall or from anybody at the police department. We don't trust what happened in our process, and as a result, we were treated unjustly. And by investing upstream, by putting an oversight body in place, you can have extra assurance from the community that we're doing our due diligence and bringing opportunities for them to be heard and for their grievances to be addressed properly. Our next slide, please. So this is what our model looks like. And I'll read this question to you and ask you to consider this. Are we building this for short-term appeasement, or are we building this for long-term effectiveness? I ask you that because, as you know, there are over 200 models of oversight throughout the country. Thinking about the fact that we're somewhere around 108 as far as population in the country, it's overdue for us to have some type of oversight here. We could do things the easy way, the quick way. I think what that would look like is establishing a CRB, say within the next 6 to 8 months, bringing together a diverse group of citizens and saying, have at it. Basically look at these cases from internal affairs and determine which ones you think were out of line or which ones you think were not followed up on properly. Instead of doing that, instead of the quick and easy fix of establishing a citizen review board up front, we're asking you instead to establish a CPOA first, and here's why. A CPOA is actually built of oversight practitioners. So they'd have tons more training than Kathy and I. The director of a CPOA, the director of a civilian police oversight authority is usually somebody with a JD, usually somebody who's a lawyer by trade, somebody who understands the continuum of justice and how it impacts citizens at as many intersections. And that director should have at their disposal at least 2 investigators. NACO goes the extra step of saying we will credential and train your oversight practitioners. So we could send this director and 2 investigators to NACO training, have them credentialed in less than a year, and have them come back and actually steward the development of a CRB. So this is going to take a little longer than just standing up a CRB, but we do understand that this is the most thorough way to have permanence in our process. Also, along with recommending the hire of an executive director and 2 investigators, we know that there needs to be an admin or a data person that's somewhere on this team, because the best models of oversight have somebody that's looking at data, making evidence-based recommendations to the police department and to the city council that can be acted on. The best manifestations of oversight actually look at everything from training to use of force policies, to use of things like tear gas, and present options to the city government on what their policies should look like in order to best impact the community. So we're asking for and really requesting you to give some serious considerations to doing the right thing, really taking a step back, establishing the CPOA on a timeline that we'll present later in the brief, and then allowing that director to have some outreach with the community, a series of forums in different districts to understand what the community needs that review board to look like and what our review board in Fayetteville would best be like, best be built to serve the community. Next slide. So the best model that we've seen here in North Carolina, the closest to what we're suggesting is actually in Greensboro. Kathy and I talked to Letitia McNeil, who was hired as their practitioner on board. She's being trained and she is a JD, understands exactly what that continuum looks like and what is best for the community. She is also that go-between from the city council to the community. And beyond that, there's nothing in North Carolina that looks like what we're presenting. We do know that there are at least 5 other boards in North Carolina. We do know that it's been established as early in 1997 in places like Charlotte. And we do know that the accusation for a lot of those boards in North Carolina is that they were set up for failure. They were set up in a way that put too much on part-time citizens to come in as a CRB and do the work really that practitioners should be doing and that practitioners do in major cities. We do not want to set our CRB up for failure. We want you to put some serious thought into what our CPOA could look like in order to best serve the city. And here are just a couple of other benefits of oversight practitioners versus just hiring a CRB. There are legal practitioners with training. This will provide you independence and permanence. Mind you, most CRBs, the members are in and out in a cycle of 2 to 3 years. And with a CRB, you'd have somebody that provides continuity so that you're not dealing with troubles like getting a quorum together for a meeting or losing members out of cycle. This is also, as I mentioned earlier, something that could give us a comprehensive look at the practices of the FPD. We've heard as an organization dozens of recommendations from people who have interfaced with us on what the FPD can do better, what the policies how the policies can change to be better. And rather than give you a list of dozens of suggestions, we'd rather tell you and work with you to build a body that focuses really on policies that impact the community in positive ways. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, these oversight practitioners can steward or be stewards of a CRB, of a review board, and continue to provide continuity. Next slide, please. So in summary, our citizens they're demanding substantive change. They're demanding more than just things that look like a performative dance. They need policy that matches the spirit and the demands of this movement. We also, in moving forward, want to invite police input. We want to caution the council, especially on what we see as undue and really immoral interference of the police unions in the past, in 2013-14 in particular. We want you to please listen to the citizens first, listen to community advocates, and then also be aware of any interference from the PBA or any other organization that wants to police themselves. Because we know that if we don't have independent oversight, we are asking the police, in essence, to police themselves, and that's not right. Also know that as an organization, PACT stands ready to guide you, to assist you in standing up these bodies. Understand that we're tied into assets nationally. Statewide, we're linked with NC-SPAN, that's the North Carolina Statewide Police Accountability Network. And then locally, we also have a growing coalition of organizations that want to work with you to make this happen and assist in the process. Next slide, please. And I'll leave you with this. We all have heard a lot about the recent passing of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian just this past weekend. You've heard a lot about what his legacy should mean to us. And luckily for us, John Lewis didn't stop fighting in the 1960s and 70s. He fought throughout his life. In preparation for that, I looked at a lot of the comments that he made even in the last 2 years. Really, he challenged us all, and that's you included as elected officials, to continue the struggle. He talked about it in terms of not just being a struggle that lasted during this 1960s, not something that lasted for years, or not even for a lifetime. He talked about it as a struggle of generations. And if we are to correct a system really that doesn't take care of its citizens as it should, if we're to correct things at a systemic level, then we really have to take his legacy into account, take his words that encourage us to continue to fight, continue to improve our foxhole, and continue to improve our system to heart and continue to fight. So I'll leave you with the words of John Lewis: if not us, then who? If not now, then when? And having said that, I'm going to conclude my portion of the brief. I'll be followed by our president and founder, Ms. Kathy Greggs. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Greggs, and I appreciate the mayor as well as the council allowing us to come and brief you this evening. Next slide. I will be discussing a portion of the CRB ordinance as well as the CRB complaint process and application process. Next slide. Sean already discovered and harped on the fact of the no-buy report that was reported many years ago in 2012, Driving While Black in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and why a CRB should have been implemented in 2014. And that is based off of Ordinance 2013-001. Next slide. As I searched through and did research, as well as our Fayetteville PACT members, we actually looked through over 13 states and 75 cities nationally. We decided to look at the ones that we felt was similar to our environment, as well as our as well as our culturally diverse community, and as well as the background of the military, as well as veterans and senior citizens. This right here is the minimum qualifications, and this example is from Albuquerque, New Mexico. This qualifications is for the CRB members as volunteers. It looks similar to the way that you actually do the Board of Commissions when you actually take an application process, as well as the requirements to be on the Board of Commissions of the City of Fayetteville. Next slide. As you can see in the slide, it shows exactly how it should look when it comes to the age, as well as the qualifications. We felt as though the qualifications should clearly say passing a background check. We did not put in specifics background checks that has to be made. However, it would have to be concluded and it has to be looked at when it comes to being a CRB member. CRB member needs to have to sign a confidentiality agreement as well as a conflict of interest and a disclose agreement. Next slide. And this is still the application process. And we are asking that the persons that decide to fill out this application has been away from law enforcement for at least a year. We also have asked that people that are on this board have training, which is annual training and orientation training. That orientation training will consist of an understanding the policies, the procedures from the city, as well as the Fayetteville PD, as well as Nicole, if you are able to do it in your budget. But we would like to make sure they have culturally diverse training, and the training is updated every year, as well as any new legislative changes to policies of CRB across North Carolina. Next slide. This is still the application process, and this can be changed, as well as we can implement anything else that you may feel as though in that application, but that is up to the city to decide how it should look and how it should mirror. We're giving you recommendations and suggestions based off of our research and what objectives is here in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Next slide. So the CRB members, of course, will be volunteer members, and they will definitely have to understand the policy and procedures that is implemented from both angles of the city, as well as the Fayetteville PD, as well as oversight, and as well as understanding culturally diverse. And also, we must understand the disclosure and confidentiality. Next slide. Next slide, thank you. The CRB ordinance in 2013-001 clearly states that any qualification for the CRB can be implemented based off of our review, as well as your review on how it should look, as well as how it should look for us and how it should look for the members. We had done research on that as well. Based off of the old ordinance, I and the Fayetteville PACT typed up a new ordinance for Fayetteville to actually go off of in order for it to be passed through legislative. Next slide. This right here is an example of the complaint process. The complaint process should be on your portal, and it should be accessible, user-friendly, on your city portal where people can make the complaint. The complaint will first go to the city portal, and then the CPOA and the admin data will work together to get those complaints, gather evidence. Evidence will then be sent over to the CRB to review and decide on recommendations. There's different ways that you can have recommendations. Right here, the example that I use is from actually Miami-Dade Police Department. This recommendation for the complaint process is unsustained, sustained, exonerated, or also deferred action. When we're talking about sustained, is that we found some way in that complaint that there may have been some violations or police misconduct. When we're saying unsustained, we're saying we need more evidence and we may have to come back. we're saying that when we have a complaint, that the person that is giving the complaint may have up to 120 days to come back and do a special hearing if they feel as though their complaint was not warranted, or if they feel as though the recommendations was not warranted. Next slide. This is still the file complaint process. There you go. You have one page here that given the information. The next page will be witnesses, and then they can attach any additional information to this process. Next slide. In summary, at the end of the statement process, as well as the complaint process, we want to make sure they have enough room to give details, enough information for it to be reviewed, so we won't have to go back to that complaint, nor when we have backlog, a lot of backlog here when it comes to reviewing due to audit purposes, as well as the administrative data personnel having issues with backlog. Next slide. Next slide, thank you. Here, right here, I did find an example of a brochure, since Fayetteville loves to make sure that we have city engagement, community engagement, as well as beautiful, beautiful brochures showing our city and advertising. So this right here is an example of how a city brochure for the CRB could look. With this brochure, it will show what way that you can process this, as well as what other ways that you are going to be able to be looked at when it comes to the complaint process. Some things are included of excessive force, harassment, racial profiling, and other police misconduct. Next slide. That is the back of the brochure, and it gives examples of what you would have to do a complaint. As you can see, we put an address. There's an address at the bottom. There's also what should be a website, so it can be easy for people to have accessibility to submit. Next slide. Okay, so let's talk about independence oversight. Sean already briefed you on exactly what we're looking for, but we all know it comes down to money. Based on our research and how much the Fayetteville PD amount of budget yearly, we're asking for a permanent salary for the 4 personnel. 1% of the Fayetteville PD budget. With the 1%, a CPOA salary is $55,000 a year. If we hired 2 investigators, their salary is $45,000 a year. Administrator data salary is $33,000 a year. With that budget, we're also allocating in the 1% a location for them to be housed at, where they can work from away from the city hall and the police department. With those funds of 1% of the Fayetteville PD budget of $57 million, we believe that we can hire the personnel that is needed to oversight the CRB. Next slide. When we talk about legislative and when we're talking about personnel files, we want to make sure that our research with our legal attorney for Fayetteville PACT, which is attorney Don Blackgrove from Emancipate, North Carolina, and North Carolina Justice Policy Center, we have asked her, how does it look for North Carolina when it comes to personnel files? This information is on North Carolina Statute 160A-168. When we're asking for the review of personnel files, this is the review for the CRB individually. This is not for a review, but it can be for a review of the city based off of the city council, the city manager, and a mayor. The mayor, the city council will have the authority based on this 160-8 to decide if they can release those records. But until then, based off of this legislative, this can be seen inside the CRB. Next slide. These are the references that we provided. You can keep going. Thank you. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. And I'm going to close out here, but before I close out, I just want to make sure that I thank the people that assisted us with this, as well as the ordinance for the Fayetteville CRB ordinance. First, we would like to thank our members of Fayetteville PACT, our board of Fayetteville PACT, Val Applewhite, Senator Kurt DeViere, North Carolina SPAN, Dr. Aguilar, Director. We would like to also thank our attorney, Don Blackgrove from Emancipate, North Carolina. And we would like to thank Save Our Sons, Dr. Kim Maturton. So do you have any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Gregg. We do have a couple, and certainly we thank all of the people that you mentioned. I know we, tonight, as I don't know if you were privileged to the 4 o'clock meeting, we discussed a few concerns or demands from another organization. And what we had talked about tonight, that which one of our committees or whichever one of our committees this falls under, I think probably internal, since it's police review, we'll take up some of these recommendations and we'll kind of work toward something that the council can actually put into legislation or resolution. So tonight we're not looking to solve the problem or give you any definitive answers, but we did have a couple of questions that arose from your presentation. So I'll start with Councilmember Hare.
Thank you, Mayor. When you stated that it's just a presentation, I was just wondering if I needed to ask all of my questions now or send my questions to the committees. But I do have about 4, and I'm going to try to put them into 2 questions, Mayor. I need to put them into 1.
It's one round, so I would put them in
one
the
round?
Yes.
Okay, so this is going to be my very, very long one round. I'm going to say "and" a lot. Okay, my first, as for the mask that was stated for detention centers, I didn't know if I didn't see where there was any support, financial budget support for that from the county, and with your civilian police oversight advisory, I didn't quite understand what would be your current authority, because within your diagram, your model diagram, it did not show the city council in your model diagram. So I didn't quite understand where did the final authority and responsibility end in what you requested, because I didn't see it in the model. Also, and the $45,000 per year for the 2 investigators, is that $45,000 for one, or you were saying both investigators were the total of the $45,000? And as far as the personnel records release, you're saying in your model that had to go through the city council to give the authority for that release, but I didn't see the city council in your model again for any role, for any role. So if I need to, I know that was a very, very long, long question, but I don't have but one. And the driving while black in 2012, I do understand that I was a part of that. We did have some we had some small consent search improvements. So I don't want to think, just to be said that we didn't have any accomplishments at all during that time, but we did. And to conclude my question, I'm trying to understand, where do we go from here with this moving through with the General Assembly? Because we've had that discussion, and that was a discussion in 2012. Also, it's a discussion here today. I'm not sure where we go and how that's presented to them. Something new need to present it to them. They need to talk to us, tell us how it worked. So all of those questions in that one question is my comment, Mayor.
Well, let me try to start at the last part of it. I think that this will work as any other legislative ask. It would be, I guess, a local bill. Some components of this will be introduced in the task force. We had already started talking about some of that. So if there's a state legislative change, that may cover it. But all we can do as a local body is send a resolution and an ask for whatever comes out of this council's, final product. Well, I think tonight is what we agreed is we will take a lot of this information in addition to what we talked about in the 4 o'clock meeting. We'll put it in these committees and we'll work through something that we can bring to council to adopt or to change or to send forward to the General Assembly. I think, and that is probably all that we can do other than use our normal political relationships to lobby and to try to advocate for change in some of these areas. So.
I have something to add on that.
Mayor, do you have any
Yeah, I'm coming, Mr. McMillan.
understanding of what took place? I mean, I know you weren't part of council. I didn't know maybe if the attorney, I think he was here with us at that time. I know she was, but what happened in that process at that time? I know it was submitted. I kind of remember because the consent search driving while black was a big thing with us at that time. What happened with that going to Raleigh, if you remember?
Mr. Hare, the council did do a resolution. There were conversations and discussion with the local delegation, and essentially no action was taken at that time as it related to the council's request.
So we sent it, they did nothing.
Yes,
I have
sir.
some more to add.
Mr. McMillan, you had something to address Mr. Hare's question.
Yeah, I'd like to especially address the last part of your concerns, Mr. Hare, because it speaks to the context. When I built this brief, it was about really where we are now. It wasn't a backwards looking. I tried to save you the embarrassment of going all the way back through what happened in 2014. I just ask anybody watching, just Google Fayetteville Observer 2014 CRB, and you'll see their account of what happened. But Mr. Hare, we really do want to move forward. I'm full of analogies tonight. But the best analogy I could give you is don't be afraid to step up to the plate and swing at the ball because you think the third baseman is going to catch it. Really, we're asking the council to do everything within your power to get this through. We know that it doesn't take the approval of the General Assembly for you to draft an ordinance to send to them. We're asking you, instead of looking at the GA, looking at state officials, to do everything in your power to make this happen. And we actually also should add that we've seen more appetite for that type of change from our statewide representatives than we have at the municipal level. And it should be the opposite. It should be the other way around. So instead of looking around and looking back, we just ask you to look in your heart and do everything you can to make
And
this
I
happen.
agree with you, sir, and we are in aggressive mode right now. So I do agree with you. Thank you, Mayor.
We appreciate that.
Thank you. Councilwoman Banks McLaughlin.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, council, I just want to say that I am in support of the CPOA. Also, I want to thank Mr. McMillan and Ms. Greggs for the presentation. You guys did a great job with the presentation. It was very informative. It was well, from listening to you guys, it was well thought through. I think right now in our community, it's definitely needed. I think that it will build trust in our community with the police department. Yeah. This is like it was already discussed all the way back years, a few years ago, that it's well overdue. Considering what's taking place throughout our nation, you guys have been being consistent and patiently waiting for different council members to come in and take on that responsibility. The only thing that I do want to get a little bit more information on, if not now, in the future, is just kind of describing a little bit more regarding CRB member training. I would like a little bit more information about the training piece. I can say that just from doing the research, many states and cities have implemented the same program, and it has been successful. And I do know that because I have made phone calls. I've spoken to someone from Charlotte, as well as Greensboro, and I want to say, I believe it was Atlanta. I would like to ask staff and the council to definitely consider this being in support of this establishment, whether we go ahead and move forward with a resolution, because we don't want this to be another incident that's put on the back burner. So again, I thank you guys for your presentation, and the rest of the council member, I hope that you guys will consider supporting this board. Just our last meeting, it was similar to, you know, what's with this board, a little bit more in depth, however, but I think that this is something that we really, really need to consider. And that's all.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Ingram.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to thank Fayetteville PACT for their presentation. I kind of want to touch on Councilmember Hare's question, well, one of his questions in his one question to I guess I did some research, and I contacted some former council members, and Mr. McMillan, I know you say you didn't want to go too far back into history, but I do think it will help serve this purpose of this conversation. And one of the organizations that came up about was the Police Benevolent Association. And there was said that there was some interference with the passing at General Assembly. And so when I hear you say to do everything within our power, I would like for this council to be open to reaching out to that organization as well, and to see, one, what was their reasoning for interfering and saying maybe they didn't support it. However, from what I heard, it was an issue of personnel records. And so I just want the council to be aware of that, because looking at this presentation, it is a very well put together presentation. I also want to point out that there is a Councilmember Waddell mentioned, and I think the other meeting or this one, I can't remember, that we already have an ordinance in place. However, that is from 2012. But we also have a full manual in place. And my question to you is, have you all seen that manual and been able to flip through that manual?
No, we've seen the old ordinance.
Okay, but you've not seen the actual manual that lays out this Citizens Review Board.
Councilwoman Ingram, if you could give us time to get you the CRB ordinance, the one that Kathy briefed.
No. What I'm asking is, this Fayetteville City Council has a full manual. Fayetteville City Council has a full manual that speaks to a Citizens Review Board. And what I'm asking is, have you all seen this manual of what the Citizens Review Board
Would have been.
We haven't seen that.
what it would have been?
It's not law.
We haven't seen that. Was that produced in 2014, Councilmember Ingram?
What did you just say?
Was it produced in 2014?
What?
2014, is that document from 2014?
I think so, but my question was, had you seen it?
No, I can answer no, but
Okay.
please trust me that what was produced in 2014 is very much like that bandage on a gaping chest wound that I talked about earlier. You don't want to go to a simple fix on this. You want something that's concrete and foundational, and it's what we're going to give you if you don't already have the ordinance that we presented tonight.
Okay, so no. I wasn't, my question was a historical precedence question. Not to saying what you're presenting to us is not anything good, but I just wanted historical presence to say, had you received anything of what was already done or had been in contact with a police benevolent association? And as I said again, when we're talking about doing everything within our power, if I know that that was an interception, then I want to bring them back to the table just so we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's for sure this time.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on that. The reason I say it was is immoral interference, because you're talking to a body of police people, policemen and women, about oversight for a police force. And if you want to do that, if that's more important to you than talking to citizens about interactions with the citizens and how to properly address grievances with the civilian populace, by all means, please do that. But please don't waste too much time going to police asking them why they want to stop you from policing you.
No, I think citizens need to be much involved in this process. I think citizens need to be much involved in this process.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kinston.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And some of this, the questions that I have, I'm sure will have to go maybe back to the committee to ask. But one of the questions that I had is about the budget itself, if it included any equipment, and also just the security of the information, where it mentioned that the location would be separate from the city hall, the police department, or any police substations. Just if the review board, if the board is reviewing a case, the security of the information that's going to be handled, and then again about the equipment, computers, printers, things like that, if that was included in the budget itself. And then the rest of the questions would just go back to review.
Yes.
Thank you.
I can answer that question because, as I said previously, I'm the one that did the budget as well as the ordinance for Fayetteville. Yes, the equipment is included, as well as the location for rental and utilities. And your other question was related to how do we pay, which I think I already addressed the 1%, as well as their salaries. Yes, that is included.
And then the last thing was the holding the security of that information. How would the security
Yes.
of whatever cases you're working on be confidential? And
Yes, that's why in the ordinance it per se, as well as having a confidentiality agreement, a disclosure agreement for security purposes, as well as not having where I discuss the personnel files being public or on a public website, but it would be within the CRB to review as a board. And then that information will be only secure with them. And that's why I asked for agreement for disclosure, conflict, and those agreements will have security written in the disclosure agreement. Yes, ma'am.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Davis had to run, but I did have a question. So, as it relates to under the legislative section of your presentation, where it talks about General Statute 160A-168, this is the current statute, right? This is the current statute?
Yes.
And so right now, what you're saying is that the city manager, with the concurrence of council, may inform an employee or person of employment or non-employment. They have the power to release records. So a city manager can release the records if it is to, before releasing the records, the manager should determine whether it's essential to maintaining public confidence. So one of the barriers that has been presented to us was that we could not review footage, we could not review information without a court order. But this says that statutorily that a vote of council can allow that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, Mayor. I am also saying that we have the authority at your local level to review the actual personnel files because they are city employees. Also, if you look at the 160-7, you can see that even the individual as a city employee can sign a waiver to release certain information from their personnel file. And when we're talking about releasing information, we're talking about releasing information to the group, which would be the CRB group, and not to public.
Okay, yeah, I understand the waiver process, but without a waiver, I guess. So this is definitely something that I would like to kind of look at a little deeper.
Mayor, if you needed any other assistance, we do have our attorney that can get with you on that. But also, we also have to look at the pro se. Individual can go and advocate for themselves and represent themselves to go receive that information when they file a complaint as well and provide it.
Okay.
So what we're saying is we have different ways that we can get around, but we also have the way that we're showing you that is in that statute that clearly states that you have the authority.
Okay. Thank you. So as I was saying, I think that this is certainly something I'm interested to hear and look forward to working on through the internal review committee. I'll go to thank you, Ms. Griggs. Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. Mr. McMillan, Ms. Gregg, thank you all for your presentation and the work that you guys continue to put into law enforcement reform. I do have a few questions about the CPOA. Number one, who oversees the CPOA? Like, who's your oversight mechanism? Who tells you all what's good, bad, and ugly, and different, what's needed, what's not needed?
Oh, okay. Just so we're clear, Fayetteville PACT has nothing to do with having any oversight of the board as well as the CPOA authority. Okay. However, as a whole, the Independence Oversight Board, what we're talking about, will have to be reviewed and oversight by the city manager, city council, as well as the mayor.
So if we put this in place, city council, mayor, city manager would be the final authority for this type of organization?
That's the difference when we're talking about an independent oversight versus a CRB in general, because the independent oversight will address and will be under the mayor, the city council, and the city manager.
Okay, because I didn't see that in the model. I think that's what Councilman Hare was kind of trying to get some information on, because as elected officials, we just want to make sure.
We didn't put it in the model, but we did put it in the ordinance, and we also provided a read ahead as well. So we did put it in that information. And if you need additional information, we can email you from our Fayetteville PACT, but we did send it to show how it works in a process and who's over who. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to Councilmember Wright. I know I see a second question by Councilwoman Banks McLaughlin, but I'll come to you after everyone has had one round. But Councilwoman, hate to do it to you, but we committed to one round, and I've got some council members looking sideways at me. So is there any way you can text your question to one of these other ladies and gentlemen who haven't spoken so that they can ask? Councilman Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the presentation, Mr. McMillan and Ms. Griggs. It was an excellent presentation, very thorough. Sometimes when people don't have the knowledge of a thing, we fear because of the lack of knowledge, and we want to appreciate how well you did your research and put things together to present this information to us, which is there's a very great need. My question is, you made a comment, Mr. McMillan, reference to other cities that were successful. What is your definition of success?
So we're going to have to, when we craft this, we need to figure out what measures of success and measures of effectiveness look like for this. For us, it has to go back to the trust that the community has in the oversight authority. It has to be able to, we have to be able to look back at, say, a year or two of this thing in place and what it's been able to provide to a community, whether they have greater faith in their investigations being carried out. It even goes back to whether the city council feels like there are some great outputs as far as recommendations on conduct, on training, on hiring. So we haven't defined those. what those measures of effectiveness look like, but success generally looks like a community and a city government that sees worth in having permanent oversight. And I hope that answers your questions. We still have a lot more work to do on exactly what that is. But if you read the implementation guide, I know it's one of the things that it does mention, is really figuring out what your measures of effectiveness are up front, which we know a little bit about from our Army experience. And that's part of the task that we have ahead of us.
Okay, thank you. So lastly, Mr. Mayor, based upon historical data of policing in our country, we see that there may be a greater need for oversight or civilian oversight, but a lot of times people fear that type of oversight, that it may have too much power and that will span out of control. So certainly, you left out in your diagram the oversight of the council, the mayor, but you clarified that would be the case, that ultimately the council will have the last look at this situation. And the privacy of the records per se could be a problem if not done properly. So what do you put in place, and how can you assure us and the citizenry that a police review board would be successful here in Fayetteville?
Yeah, I said we definitely need to take our time in building the CPOA. When we send our oversight practitioners to NACO for training, for credentialing, they will be getting best practices from 40 years of oversight as it looks in other cities. I've been to at least one national conference and another regional conference, and I was outnumbered. I was a community advocate amongst mostly lawyers, sheriffs, judges who had already made the decision to support oversight. And they all had experience on what best practices look like. And they're all pushing each other to really reimagine how they could do their jobs better. For us, we will really need to lean heavily on the oversight practitioners and the knowledge they get from other people that are doing it in cities that have been established for a long time, like Pittsburgh or Miami or DC or in Atlanta. It's time for us. Our time is past due, and North Carolina even needs to step its game up. But we definitely need to go back. We definitely need to invest in understanding what's worked in other cities in order to know what's possible here. And I agree with you that people are afraid of challenging the status quo. People are afraid of rocking the boat or doing anything that's different than what they've been doing for generations. But then again, in this moment, we're challenged to do exactly that. It's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of city council members because you guys you're partners with the police. You're partners with the judicial system. You're partners with the sheriff's office. You guys are a family, and I know there's some protectiveness over each other's processes. But also remember that you serve a populace, you serve people that elect you all. And the police, we don't work for any police officer. You work for the people of Fayetteville. So we ask you to take the approach of really being community advocates first and being part of that citywide team or that countywide team secondly. So really our measures of success really need to go back primarily to what the people of Fayetteville and the voters of Fayetteville think is important.
Thank you, sir. Just want to thank you for your hard work and passion on this matter.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Wright. Councilman Dawkins?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, Councilman Wright correctly acknowledges the importance of the privacy because police lives depend on this privacy. This is very serious, what we're even discussing, and I don't see it as being a problem in Fayetteville, North Carolina. It may be a problem in some cities across this country, such as Minneapolis, Portland, Atlanta, thankfully possibly Raleigh, but I need to see more data to see if it's truly here. Mr. City Manager, is our police chief still here? Or yes. Police chief, you can just holler out the answer, but do you believe you have civilian oversight of your Fayetteville Police Department? do you believe that you answer to civilians? Yes, sir. Okay, thank you, Chief. She does answer to civilians. You lost me when you started making demands. I tell you, I've only been at this since 1968, and I doubt either one of our presenters was even born then. But to come in here and make these demands without going about the proper procedures is disappointing. My question to you, Mr. McMillan, have you notified Sheriff Wright of your specific demands of him?
Absolutely.
What's that?
I'll answer your question in two parts. Actually, I'll address specifically Sheriff Wright and what's been sent to him. And then I'll go back at you on making demands at this point in this moment. Okay? First of all, for Sheriff Wright, we have notified in an email as recently as last week on what our demands of him are. Demands, and I didn't say requests.
Did you get a response from Sheriff Wright, Mr. McMillan?
It's our right as citizens to make those demands. And if he can't meet those demands, then he doesn't need to be in the seat.
Oh, wow.
Also
So you're saying if he can't meet those demands, he should not be sheriff. I want to make sure I'm clear. My doggone hearing aid is the battery's getting low. Say again, Mr. McMillan?
Yes, specifically as recently as last week, and we posted it online. You can go on our Facebook page and see. We notified Sheriff Wright, Major Adams, and Lieutenant Swain, all three via email of our specific requests/demands for more safety.
No. Okay, so you said requests/demands. I think it's demands, sir. Secondly, have you notified the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners of your specific demands on them?
Absolutely. So get used to people making demands. So we're not the last generation, and we're going to fight hard for what we know we deserve. We're going to fight hard for human rights. We shouldn't even have to ask for people to be allowed to have masks in the detention center. If you're challenged by the word demands, please get used to it. It's a different time. This moment is full of people taking it to the streets and really demanding what we need as people, what we know we deserve. It's part of your social contract, part of our social contract between citizens and our elected officials for you to meet the demands of the people.
Gotcha.
And we're not going to back off of that language.
Well, that's fine. No, I respect you. I mean, you're...
respect to ask your question. Please don't interrupt me. I will also say that the County Board of Commissioners all received individual emails.
Don't let this count toward my time. I got a bunch more questions.
Detention center.
It's one round, not a bunch more, because you.
And
we also CC'd every member of the County Board of Commissioners on our last set of emails to Sheriff Wright. So you can ask them if you like, but yes, they have been notified.
Okay, well, you were right earlier to say that the city of Fayetteville, the council, has nothing to do with the sheriff's office. Now, they are, I think we consider them to be law enforcement partners because they are professionals also. But you were also correct to say that we cannot dismantle the immoral practice of cash bail. So you make some valid points, and I'm assuming, Mr. Mayor, my last question is for you. Is this going to a committee? Is that the?
Well,
I mean, I've heard well, we're ready to move on this, and I've heard well, it's going to go to the internal committee. And then I've heard well, we've got it at the state legislature now. We just need to update it.
Well, so to answer your specific questions, too, the motion that you had in the 4 o'clock meeting was a list of demands by Ville Voices. It was called that. It was called the demands. So all of them have stated and used a similar language to call it demands, requests, however you want to term it. So I think let's not cloud the issue. Two is the ask would be, I'll go to Councilmember Banks for this, is that we understand that we're not going to solve this problem tonight in its entirety, but to allow these committees to drill down and to see what we can and can't send up as a resolution request. And third, Councilman Dawkins, I want to say one thing. We've made a lot of improvement here, but we were also the second or third highest in the state, not relative to our population, but in the state for police stops that were not being accounted for. So we've had issues, we've got room for improvement, but we fixed a lot of things. But
are you talking about 7 or 8 years ago?
Yes, sir.
I want to see the numbers, what we're doing now. Because I've been told we're doing better.
That's a good question for the committee. Good question for the
Right,
committee. Yes,
because
sir.
I've been told we're doing better, and I've been told that Raleigh is doing 10 times worse than
Okay.
we are. So,
Well, it's a
you know,
good
sometimes
conver-
we're just trying to find solutions for
Yes, sir.
problems that are truly not
Well, we
as
got you.
pressing.
Got you, Councilman Dawkins. But at the end of it, we know that we won't get there tonight. We'll move this to, if council so chooses, I'll call on Councilmember Banks McLaughlin to refer this to the internal committee. It looks like a great conversation. Mr. McMillan, thank you and your group for your research and your presentation and answering our questions and joining us tonight. You all did a great job, but we do have to move this along, council. So Councilmember Banks McLaughlin.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. First and foremost, Mr. McMillan, I would like to apologize on behalf of Councilman Dawkins. No, seriously. Secondly, I feel that this special meeting was brought up because it's needed. It's a concern throughout our. So the fact that we're in a special meeting, that shows that it's needed. With that being said, I would like to make a motion that the council move forward to putting together assisting you guys with putting together the CPOA, and I would like council support on that motion to make that vote tonight.
May I offer? Oh.
All right. There was a motion by Councilmember Banks McLaughlin. There was a light by Councilmember Wright. I know that I heard verbally from Councilmember Ingram, but so it has a motion properly second. Any discussion on the motion to move this to internal committee? Okay, what did you say, Councilmember?
We need an amendment.
Councilmember, can you repeat, restate your motion? Councilmember Banks McLaughlin?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Restate your motion. Can you restate your motion?
Yes, I would like to make a motion that we establish the CPOA.
So not to refer to the committee, you're going straight?
I think the committee should play a role in it, but I think that we should move forward with a resolution.
All right, let me clear the board, you guys. So that's a motion to establish the CPOA. Is there a second for that? All right, so motion dies for lack of a second. All right, I got Councilmember Hare and then Ingram. Councilman, okay, so Councilmember Ingram.
Mayor Colvin, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the report from Fayetteville PACT and move their recommendations to the internal committee, and in hopes we'll work with Fayetteville PACT through this committee to see that these recommendations may potentially happen.
So there's a motion by Councilwoman Ingram, there's a second by Councilmember Hare. Discussion on the motion to move this to the committees to further discuss. All right, Council, I'll look to you for, you had a discussion? You had a question, sir? Okay. All right, Council, I'll look to you for your votes to move this to committee for.
He's got a question over here, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, Councilman Davis.
Okay, so what we're doing now is we're collecting information from all of the different entities in the city, and they will all be placed on the same exact pedestal, the same exact desktop. Voices, PACT, 100 Black Men, every resolution on the same level, so that the internal committees and external committees can have them properly split up by you and the co-chairs and work through in order to come up with the next phase. So I want to make sure that, understand I'm right or wrong, because I don't want organizations thinking that we've done something in alignment with one organization and we haven't taken everyone's stuff in and properly disseminated it to the co-chairs to do the hard work. Am I right?
So that is my understanding, that this is a part of the community discussion where they offer ideas and suggestions that we will somehow wrap and codify into some legislation. So that is correct, sir. It's not necessarily saying one group over another, but we did receive recommendations earlier from Ville Voices that came out of that discussion. Tonight, FAPAC has given us a lot to work through for this. If there's something else from 100 Black Men or the Pastors Coalition we will continue to engage. We promise to do that. So that is the way I understand it. Council, is that your motion, Councilwoman Ingram? Was that your motion? That's the way you understood it, that this would go to committee?
Yes, sir.
All right, and Councilman Harris, is that your understanding?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're saying that all of these, as you stated, go to our committees and nothing extra, that they are going to our committees,
Yes, sir.
whichever direction they may go.
All right, can you
internal,
restate your motion, Councilwoman?
Yes, Mayor, I can. I'd like to make a motion that we accept Fayetteville PACT's report and move their recommendations to to our committees to be disseminated amongst the committees for that we can work on them in partnership with the community.
Okay. That's a motion by Councilwoman Ingram. It was seconded by Councilman Hare. Is that a vote or discussion? Discussion.
Mr. Mayor, I understood from Councilmember Davis that I want to look at the 100 Black Men requests. I want to look at all the different organizations that made these requests, but that is not in her motion. So I can support her motion if it includes Ville Voice or Ville whatever.
We took care of that one earlier.
And, well, but it's not in her motion. So as long as the Ville Voice and the 100 Black Men, and we had the Cape Fear chapter.
Hold on for a second, Councilman Dawkins. I think she specified that. I'll get you to clarify it. But if we start trying to name organizations we think are going to have input, I think what I understood earlier was that we heard what Ville Voices had to present and ask us to consider. We're listening now. We've heard what PAC had, and that's the reason why they specified those organizations. As others come in and are brought to the discussion, I think we adopt or send those things to the committee to merge into the conversation. That is the way I understood it. It was not necessarily including or precluding anyone from adding to it. So just to clarify, I think the motion tonight is to receive the report we've heard, that we did hear it, to say that we're going to forward it to the committees for further discussion and work with the community, which includes everyone. So we want to hear from everyone, Rotary, whomever it is. Okay? All right. So, all right. So, council, we've had a lot of discussion. We have some very expensive lawyers on the clock tonight, so let's move this along to a vote. So those who are in favor to move this to a committee, please vote. Or in oppose. All right, Councilwoman Banks? McLaughlin?
Red.
Okay.
Red.
Okay. Is it red or green, Councilwoman?
Red.
Red. Okay. All right, so the motion carries 8-2. Those voting in favor: Davis, Wright, Colvin, Jensen, Ingram, Hare, Kinston, Waddell. Voting in opposition: Dawkins, Banks, McLaughlin. Thank you. Thank you, Faye PAC.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, council.
That was a good move, I think.
All right, council. We will give a few minutes for transition. We'll allow our technical team to prepare for attorney-client privilege discussion. Executive session, so we'll need a motion to go into closed session and we'll transition.
Move, sir.
All right, there's a motion by Councilmember Hare, there's a second by Councilmember Ingram to go into closed session for attorney-client privilege. All those in favor or council, I ask for your vote to go into closed session. All right, Councilmember Banks, McLaughlin to go into closed session for attorney. Okay.
Yes.
All right, it carries 8-2, Madam Clerk.
Garage be completed at the time of purchase of the retail space free and clear of all liens. Amend the parking garage lease to reduce the number of years where the lease payment is locked in initially to 3 years from 7 years, and installation of one permanent elevator in the parking garage within 12 months to be secured by a promissory note amount of $150,000 in deed of trust and a second lien position on the remaining retail space in the parking garage and the air rights, as well as a guarantee from PCH, and that might need to be Ann Hay Street Pad Development. Is that right, Mr. Lawyer?
It'll be signed in note, Mrs. Joshua. It'll already be obligated.
And authorize the city manager to execute the necessary documents to effectuate the amendments to budget ordinance 2021-1. And Mr. City Manager, do we need to specify how it's paid? Does that need to be a second motion?
No, I think we've got 30, and it will be from these vehicles.
All right. So there's a motion by Councilmember Dawkins as stated. There's a second by Councilwoman Ingram. Any discussion on the motion? All right, Council, I'll look to you for your votes. Councilmember Banks McLaughlin?
I'm sorry, I was on the line listening on the phone. I didn't hear everything that he's,
So there was a motion put forth by Councilmember Dawkins. It was seconded by Councilwoman Ingram to purchase the 4,700 square feet retail space under the parking garage as stated. It was a lengthy motion, so I didn't want to read it all. But it was consistent with the discussion that we had.
Red.
Okay, all right. All right, Madam Clerk, that is 9-1. Those voting in favor, Councilman Davis, Dawkins, Wright, Colvin, Jensen, Ingram, Hare, Kinston, Waddell. Those voting in opposition, Councilmember Banks McLaughlin. All right. All right. Y'all have a good evening. I don't want to see you anymore this month.